I'm Cathy Weber, and we're here in my studio in Dillon, Montana. And I've been asked to tell you a little bit about the work I'm doing here. I'm just going to start out talking a little bit about books, beginning with really old books and what they are made up of and what the elements are that constitute the page of an old book. I have a book here with reproductions of old manuscripts that were made in the 1500s in Europe. And I'll show you a few pictures of pages of books. And I'll tell you the names of some of the parts. So all of this where there's writing is called, by people who know about old books, the text block. And then often there's a letter. Now this one, in this case, is the letter D. Sometimes they're hard to read because they're sort of fancy, but this is the letter D, and that's called the versal letter. And then there are borders, border designs, and any little character, the little animals and people that you find in the margins are called marginal grotesques. So that's kind of a fun thing. So a lot of times the page is made up of a text block, versal letters, decorative letters, and sometimes and a narrative, sometimes a narrative block, a little block with a story in it that isn't a letter. And these letters, when they have people or animals in them, are called inhabited letters. So there'll be an inhabited versal letter. So you can see, as we look at a few different pages, that the structure's the same, the size of the elements as they relate to each other change. This has a very small text block, a decorative margin, a big narrative block, and a versal letter. And here you have where it's light colors on a dark background. It's a little different than the ones we've seen. So there are lots of variables. This is a standard treatment where there's a gold background. And actually they used real gold. There'd be a gold background and then botanical or plant-based margins. And then you have your text block and your versal letter. So that was just to give you a general idea. And this is sort of a diagram of the way a page would look, and something that you could use if you wanted to make something along the lines of an old illuminated manuscript. You'd put your text block here, your versal letter, a narrative block, and your marginal decorations. So I wanted to show you this because I, probably 20 years ago, got very, very interested in these old books and the shape and the structure, and over the past 20 years have worked along these lines with this idea based on the books and gotten to where I have gotten today, and it's hardly recognizable from the book. But for about 10 years I did some poetry. It was modern poetry that I did on skin, on a calf skin and sheepskin, like these old books, because these books were made before paper was readily available in Europe. So people did them on skins that were prepared for writing, called parchment. For a long time I did this poetry, and it looked very, very much like these books, and I used letters. And then a few years ago I started substituting objects for the letters. So I would line up stones and line up sticks and bones and all kinds of things in the place of the text block, and we'll look at some of those as we go along. The other thing that I've been doing, so let's jump way ahead, 20 years from when I first started looking at these to what I'm doing right now. And here are some things here's one finished piece and some things I'm working on. This is an accordion book. It actually folds all up into a book. It can come off of this little rack, or it can hang on the rack on the wall and spread out. It's called an accordion book because it opens and closes the same way the musical instrument, the accordion, does. And the pages are revealed like this. This falls into the category of what artists today call artists' books, which is basically anything that has the form of a book, and sometimes it's very obvious that it's a book, and sometimes it isn't. When I think about books, I think about what makes a book, and part of it is the fact that when it's closed, something's hidden. When it's open, something is revealed. it has it has pages that make it up. So for example, here's another artist's book I'm working on. This will be 16 paintings because I have 8 pages. There'll be a painting on either side, and they can be moved around. So the pages are independent. They're not bound the way a book is bound or the way this accordion book is bound. But that could be considered an artist's book too. And all of these are oil paintings. They're done on paper that's covered with a white protective surface called gesso. And for example, here are some parts to other paintings that I'm working on. They're shaped like little houses, and they're pieces of hardboard covered with this white paint called gesso, and I'll sand it down and then I'll paint on it with oil paintings. And these are also big oil paintings I'm working on. Now this one is roughly based on that thing we were talking about with the shape of a book page. This part would be the narrative block or the versal letter, and then I've got the lines of what would be the text block. They're going to run this way. And you can see that I actually really like to be able to observe the things that I'm painting. So I set up the line of stones, and then I'll basically draw them and paint from the stones that I've set up for this picture. So, and for the little narrative block, I took my little stubby little hand and put a stick in it, painted a picture. People look at those pictures and they go, "Look at those fat little fingers." I go, "Look, here they are." So, and I've got the part of this other sort of marginal decorative piece is hanging there. There's the bird's nest. So I thought that I would show you a few different things that I think are books. This here is a standard Coptic binding, and it's something that ends up just looking like a book. So what I've got is pages of, this is a paper from India called the Indian Village, handmade paper that's gessoed, and then I sew them up with a linen thread and then gesso the whole thing. Paper and linen you can't paint on it with oil paints unless you cover it with gesso, because it'll rot the paper and it'll rot the string. So there's something that looks very much like a book. Now here is sort of the wildest shaped book I have going right now. This thing would hang on the wall like this, and it's not finished. You know, there'll be more painting on this, but it's going to open up this way, and then I've got this little figure inside of here, and the little heart path. So whoever ends up with this picture on their wall can pull the strings and close the book and close it back up the way you saw it when we started out. And then another thing I've got is over here. Let's see what we need to do to rearrange here. This is an accordion book that's running vertically, a little different than the one we saw before, and it'll be set up also with strings you can pull so that when this is finished, the book can hang on the wall just like that in a little frame. And then whoever has it can open it up like that. So that's another way of approaching the shape of an accordion book. This piece is in the exhibit that you'll be seeing at the museum. And it's another accordion book. It's made on paper, sewn together with linen thread. And because it's a book, my sense is that it'll be read from left to right the way people in our culture read books. Now, in some other countries, in some other languages, books are read in the other direction. But here we read them in this direction. So there's sort of this narrative of these little houses supported by wings and the apple. And this whole thing is a separate book. It's just got a little rack. So it all comes off the rack. It folds up into a closed book. So it closes and opens the way you understand a book to close and open. I'll just set this down for the time being. Here's another differently shaped book. This has a little accordion book as steps here. And then this closes up like that. And the other side can fold down. And the whole thing folds. Here, I'll do that. Into. Let's do this. The whole thing folds into a little book this way. And here you can see one of the books like the one I showed you that I was working on in the back. And I've set this up on a structure with, there are some versals, there are some narrative blocks. The basic structure of each page is a 3-line stone poem. So again, the person who has this book can change what they see at any given time. And at any given time, about 3/4 of this book is not visible. So you can only see about 25% of the book at any given time. Here's one that's structured a little more like something that you would recognize as an illuminated manuscript. This is made on the skin parchment, the same kind of skins that were used by the medieval illuminators. And there's your narrative block, your versal letter, and lines of what would be text in an illuminated manuscript. In this case, I'm using objects. Here are a couple pieces I've just finished along those same lines. You've got your versal, your lines of text. I call these stone poems. Here's a little thing I made for myself based on the structure of the page that we looked at earlier. This would be the text block and a versal letter. And it's just an opportunity I have to line up objects that I, things I love. I mean, basically, how I choose what ends up in a picture is just about what I love. So this is an old card catalog the libraries used to use before things were on computer. Card catalog cabinet that I keep things in. So I've got, like, here's a robin skull, and here's a little bird skull that I found in my yard, and here's my drawer full of heart-shaped rocks. These are all, I go around on the rivers in my canoe and look for rocks that are shaped like hearts. And I have keys are something that interests me, so I have a drawer full of old keys. And I have bird eggs. And there's seeds. All kinds of things. Anything I love. These are all things that I love. So I use heart imagery a lot because 10 years ago this year, my partner died of cancer, and I had made a series of pictures about the experience of grief. And a lot of the imagery that kept presenting itself in the course of that work was connected to blood and water and the state of my heart. So I started paying attention to the heart as a symbol for my emotional condition. I guess that would be the way to describe it. So it's still here, and my heart's in a lot better shape than it was right after Jack died. So it's appearing in different ways. Here you can see the way I set up a poem like this. This will be an object poem that I'm making on this sheet of gessoed paper. And I've got it set up with all the little wings and feathers lined up the way I'm going to do them in the finished picture. Part of the way I work is that if I have a clear notion for something, I'll do that part, and it will often inform what happens next. So I don't feel like I have to know exactly what's going to happen in the painting. I have friends who are artists who do marvelous little sketches and thumbnails of everything that they do, and they are going to know they know ahead of time exactly what's going to happen. I don't. I let the process often dictates what's going to happen. Next in the picture for me. Here's another accordion book. So this will fold up like this when it's finished, and there will be embellishments all over. But at this point, what I have finished, this is a poem done in beads. And then the embellishments, the border embellishments, are oil painting. This is on a bookboard panel that's gessoed. It's a long process. I'll work on this. The paint has to dry for days and days and days, and then I'll be able to go back and work on it some more. The leaf forms here, these forms are, the name for them is acanthus. And there's an acanthus plant that has been, over centuries, stylized into this particular form. So this is not something, this kind of embellishment is not something I've made up, although I don't copy each individual version of it myself from something else. But the style is, it's a stylized acanthus that has been part of particularly illuminated manuscript painting. It's a traditional border embellishment in illuminated manuscript painting. It's a standard visual icon in an artistic language. And that's something that those of us who are lucky enough to get to work as artists, we have to do our studying, and we have to find out what's available to us and what's been done with what we're interested in. And while it can be considered sort of an insult to be called derivative, meaning that your work derives specifically from something else, really any educated artist is drawing from a very rich human history of making art. And there are lots and lots of things available to us that haven't been explored entirely in every way. So we have the opportunity to take up where others have left off and move along. My fascination with old manuscripts didn't begin until I was an adult. I really didn't have much exposure to old manuscripts until I was probably in my 20s, and I went to the Morgan Library in New York, which has a fabulous collection of illuminated manuscripts. And I started looking at those, and then I went back later and realized that part of what made the illuminated manuscripts so amazing, what gave them this really bright, luminous quality and this really clean line, was the fact that they were made on skin and not paper. Because the first few tries I made at things that looked like illuminated manuscripts, I tried to do on paper, and it just didn't work, because paper is made of fibers and it's all kind of tied together, and no matter what you do, some of the pigment in your paint gets lost under the fibers and you don't get this brilliant look. So I can show you here, I have this is a whole calf skin, and the surface of the skins is very, very smooth. Now this one here is called veiny calf, so you can see here's the spine of the animal, and here's places where there were veins. There's a sheepskin here that's very white and much thinner. That's making terrible noises. This is a sheepskin, this is a calf skin. So before there was paper readily available in Europe, artists worked on skins. But I did visit museums when I was a child. I was one of those very rare few people who, if you had asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up when I was 6 years old, I would have told you, it's not even about what I want. I am going to be an artist. You know? I've just been absolutely certain. And my mother's a musician and an actress, and my whole family, the arts were very important when I was growing up. So I was always offered lessons in anything I wanted. And the one battle was that they sort of had to force me to branch out and to do things with music, and I would put up a fuss and say, that's not my thing. I'm actually very grateful for that at this point. Some people are lucky enough to get to be artists. I mean, we get to be the people who make art as our life's work, and it is a wonderful, wonderful job to have. And you know, there's just no reason why anybody with a vision for it can't do it.